I'd be on my front porch too, but they're re-roofing the house next to me.
Oh, it sounds loud.
Yeah, it is loud.
All right. Well, Madison, hello. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. So just as an introduction, because we are recording this,
Okay.
I am speaking to you today as Theric Jepson, a writer in the Mormon sphere, and Madison Daniels. I think you could identify much the same way, but why don't you do it for yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Madison. I was born and raised in Provo, Utah. I'm thoroughly of Utah Mormon stock. I graduated from BYU a few years ago. I've been kind of a naturalist, super curious about the natural world my entire life, and I graduated with my degree in environmental humanities from BYU.
Oh,
So
I don't think they
George
had that
Hanley.
one at the BYU.
Well,
Oh, George Hanley did it. Okay, that
technically
makes
it's an
sense.
emphasis. It's an interdisciplinary humanities degree, but environmental humanities was kind of our emphasis track. George Handley was my mentor professor, and Brigham Daniels or Steve Peck, all of them were my professors at one point or another. So I was kind of raised in the school of environmental Mormon thought.
Those are a couple of good writers too.
Yeah, really great people.
So when did you graduate?
2017.
2017, just a few years ago.
So two and a half, 3 years
Uh-huh.
ago.
And are you doing anything with environmental humanities besides Bristlecone Firesides, which we'll come to in this
Yeah.
COVID world?
um, Interestingly enough, I worked for the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. So I don't know if you've heard of them.
No, but I
Um,
can imagine. Tell me more.
yeah, so the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance is a nonprofit, a local nonprofit specifically dedicated to protecting wilderness lands in Utah. So that Utah has a lot of great, obviously, a lot of great wilderness land. But we've got our national parks, our state parks, our recreation areas, our monuments. But then there's a bunch of land in between that that is just kind of generalized land that doesn't fit under any designation other than generalized Bureau of Land Management land. And our mission as an organization is to try and fill in the gaps for the sake of like ecological integrity and for the sake of preserving land for future generations.
That sounds great. And are
Yeah.
you able to do that work from home right now?
Yeah, I am. So my role with them is actually I'm a community organizer, and I'm specifically a faith community organizer. So my role with them is oddly enough right in the vein of my own degree from BYU, which is trying to drum up support with Utah's faith communities, not just Mormons, but also from the wider faith communities that exist within Salt Lake Valley as well as the state as a whole.
How do the various faith communities fight? Do, do they
Um,
do they take your bait?
yeah, actually, I think especially within like the Salt Lake Valley, for better or worse, that um, other faith communities who aren't Mormon tend to position themselves as a glowing alternative for people who tend to be a little bit more of a liberal or progressive, um, temperament. And so most faith communities inside the Salt Lake Valley love to join on and be very, very supportive of the environmental issues.
But I noticed you seem to leave Latter-day Saints out of that.
Um, yes and no. I'm not naive to the fact that most Latter-day Saints tend to be of a conservative persuasion. But I do know that because of my schooling at BYU, that there is a powerful strain of environmental Latter-day Saint thought. And so part of my passions as just an individual, notwithstanding my role at SUA, is to help raise that really powerful environmental consciousness within our own faith, so that we can kind of disengage or disentangle the political aspects of environmental conservation from our faith's position on it.
That's an important thing to do. I looking outside at this moment in a time of like protests and riots and severe police action, we can see that a lot of political issues that are taken by conservative politicos are not necessarily the same thing as what scripture might teach, for instance.
Yes.
I don't know how to say that without upsetting the people I'm going to upset, but there does seem
It
to
is what it
be,
is.
there does seem to be an interest in at least younger Latter-day Saints, and by younger I'm probably saying under 30 or so, maybe even under 40. I don't know exactly. I don't live in Utah, which is where the concentration effect changes reality a little bit, but
Yes, it does.
but you're not alone on this, right? Like Stephen Peck edited a special issue of Dialogue a few years ago. It was environmentally themed. LDS Earth Stewardship seems to be going pretty strong, and I know there's another group that I don't know the name of them, but they're doing the same thing. There's one in Mesa, or it's called Mesa.
So it's Mormon Environmental Stewardship Alliance, and
Okay.
their acronym is MESA.
Maybe that's the other one I know. There's one where a member of my ward is deeply involved with, but I don't actually know the name of it.
Oh.
Torrey House is coming out with a collection of Mormon environmental writing.
They are?
They are.
That's fantastic news.
Yeah. So I think that well, let's switch over to Bristlecone Firesides
right
now, because the goal, as I understand it, is to provide another way of seeing these questions through a Latter-day Saint lens.
Yeah. So I think I kind of was brought up in this confluence of ideas. The number one, I'm a nerd for the earth, big time. I'm a complete tree hugger. I am a and also I'm a complete nerd for Mormonism. Like I grew up like loving just being a Latter-day Saint in Provo and being in the heart of it. And I just kind of grew up in this, and then going to BYU and being introduced to this larger school of thought, I was kind of shifted into this different ways of viewing my own faith in relationality and communication with the world around it. I read this while I was at BYU. I was put in touch with this book called Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No.
It's by this a botanist and Potawatomi woman who wrote this book that's semi-autobiographical, but it's about braiding together the stories of an indigenous perspective on the land, a scientific perspective on the land, as well as a settler or colonial perspective on the land. And she's braiding together these narratives to try and figure out what does it mean to be indigenous or native to a place. And so I was really touched by that, and thought, there's a lot of really great sources of Mormon thought that exist right now in our community, between dialogue or between by common consent or the AML. There's just a lot of great places of conversation, and all of them have had great moments of environmental conversation, but no one's really talking about it specifically, like focused on it. And so I thought, what does it mean to belong to the earth as a Latter-day Saint? What does it mean from, within our scriptures? Like, what do our scriptures have to say about it? What do our history have to say about it? And I think what kind of the work of Bristlecone Firesides became was, in conversation with all my friends and peers and students that I was at BYU with, and my professors, was we need to do the work of belonging to the earth as a community. And we're going to do that through art. We're going to do that through literature and poetry. And we're going to try and change people's hearts and minds, because, facts and figures can only do so much, but really where you get people is in their hearts.
That's great. And I can definitely point to some works that have had that effect on me or people I know. Like, when you started to bring up a book, I just sort of assumed it was going to be Terry Tempest Williams, because that's when she usually shows up in the conversation.
Yes.
And there have been a couple of great flash pieces in the Mormon Lit Blitz that were environmental in nature that I've been able to share with people and provide a different sense of looking at the environment through this Latter-day Saint ideology. I also really love the name Bristlecone Firesides. And on the website, you give an explanation, but I'm curious what the genesis was. Like, you have a great explanation for why Bristlecone Firesides is a good name, but I'm curious how where did the genius moment come or you just knew that the Bristlecone was the way to go?
Yeah. So Bristlecone Firesides, the website itself was like, I kind of knew that I always kind of wanted to join the larger world of Latter-day Saint conversation. And in conversation with some of my friends that were, in the same major at BYU, we kind of, I was friends with a lot of science, biology students and a lot of humanities students. And so we were kind of throwing around ideas about what would this thing be called? And I had actually just read Tree at the Center by Catherine Knight
Oh,
Sontag,
yeah,
a book
great
of
book.
poetry. And so I was kind of caught up in this world of like, oh, a world tree, the tree of life as a motif. And so I kind of like, what are the trees that exist in Utah? I mean, I know that the environmental conversation is much larger than Utah,
Sure.
but the Latter-day Saint conversation is certainly centered here. And so I was throwing around aspens or cottonwoods, and then the bristlecone pine exists down in the Cedar Mesa area. And once I kind of caught hold of the idea of the bristlecone pine as being this eternal tree that is, that exists for thousands of years, that they're the single oldest living organism on planet Earth, I just was caught up by that. And then firesides is kind of a natural extension of Latter-day Saint thought of, we go to firesides to have conversations that we don't typically have over the pulpit. And they tend to be of topics that we don't typically talk about during Sunday school. But they still are very much about our faith, but they're just unique perspectives or takes and conversations that we just typically wouldn't have. And so the combination of those things, Bristlecone Firesides, I was like, that sounds really cool. Let's totally go for it.
Yeah, it has a nice rhythm to it.
Yeah.
It's long, but it's catchy, which is distinctive in the internet world. Like everything needs to be catchy, but most people aren't willing to go to Bristlecone Fire. Like
I
depending
know.
on whether you count fire as one or 1.5 or 2 syllables, it's quite a long
Right.
word.
It is, but it did have that kind of that je ne sais quoi, that magic to it, that kind of makes you wish that you were around a fire with just some friends, just chatting about the life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah. Would Bristlecone Firesides exist without COVID?
Yes. So what's really unique with my position at SUA is that it's kind of a little bit how like, at Google where it's like 12% of your time is your own project.
Yeah.
SUA, because I'm the only Latter-day Saint on staff there, and my role as a faith organizer, they have no way of, they hired me specifically because no one there really knows how to approach communities of faith. And so I was like, okay, well, I can do that for you.
Yeah.
And so a substantial part of my working hours with SUA is essentially relegated to my own projects.
Oh.
And so I have a lot of freedom. And so the last year or so, this is one of the projects that I've been working on, kind of in some of my own free time where I'm not doing larger organizing with SUA. But over the last year or so, I've been kind of toying around with the ideas, especially with my friends, putting together ideas, but then getting connected to artists and getting connected to people to throw together a logo and to help build the site. There was kind of just a chain of people that I just kept running into. It was like, well, I guess this is going to happen. And then it just so happened that the world fell apart right around the spring solstice or the spring equinox. And I was like, well, this is fantastic because now I can essentially be a blog administrator while I'm forced to be at home working.
Do you, besides running the website itself, how is editorial broken up? Do you do it all yourself? Do you have some volunteers helping out, or what?
Basically, I do it myself. I have a lot of contacts who are willing to contribute a lot, like yourself, which was really great. But most of the editorial work as of now is up to me, which is fun because I love writing, I love reading, and I love kind of being in the world of trying and testing ideas with people, and trying to make something as good as it can be. And I've kind of worked on blogs in the past, and so I'm familiar with how to run a WordPress blog, essentially.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, it's curious. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the last 6 weeks or so, there's been an explosion of small zines done by people who are either
Yes.
undergrads or recently out of college, and there's a really interesting ecosystem building up where they support each other. I don't know if Bristlecone is involved with any of those.
Do you know? Are you speaking of the archive?
No, I wasn't actually. I was going to bring
Oh,
up the archive later, but no, just not specifically Mormon. There's just
really?
been an explosion of
Oh, yeah,
really
yeah. I
small
mean,
literary
yeah,
magazines.
yeah. I do know that zines are kind of taken off in a much larger realm. Yeah.
Yeah, but
So
I
it is kind of
understand
an
you are
exciting
involved
thing.
with the archive. Somebody told me that.
Yeah, so I am. So I was at the Sunstone Symposium last summer, and I was approached by Camilla and Laz, and that well, I'd already kind of, because I mean I grew up in Provo, and that you tend to just run into the same people all over the place, and so I was already kind of familiar with them, but then um, that they were really caught up with, I was pitching to them this idea of, I'm probably going to throw together a blog here in the time being. And they were kind of like, oh, this is really cool, that you're a writer and we need more artistic kind of voices within our little community. And so I was probably with, one of the first 20 or so that joined on the archive. And so I have one or two zines in the works with them that I'm working on. That I'm a writer. I'm not an actual artist, so I have to rely on other people to do a lot of the graphics for me. But yeah, so the archive actually. That's how I was put in touch with people to be able to help me with the logo and with the actual website design, because I'm all thumbs with technology.
Well, it's exciting. It's an exciting moment, not just more broadly, but with the archive, with Bristlecone Firesides, and with a few other little groups, not necessarily groups, but individuals I know. It looks like we are in a moment where, and these happen periodically in Mormon letters, where a generation like latches on and starts to create new things. And the big question always becomes like sustenance, like how do you sustain this over a period of time? And I don't know, maybe it's too early to ask you that question, but what is the future here?
I don't know. I just know that for me, this is stuff that I've wanted to talk about, wanted to write about for forever, and stuff that I have had conversations with my parents or with my professors or coworkers. But now to be able to kind of be able to dialogue about it in a much larger way and to try and join the conversation that I've always been an audience member for is just really exciting. As far as sustaining it in the future, so far, like I've actually received a lot of submissions, more so
Oh,
than
great.
I thought. So like I just keep getting scheduled another month out, doing 2 posts a week, which is way more than I ever anticipated. Um, and so I'm scheduled out probably through June, maybe half of July, which is way more than I ever anticipated. Um, but but yeah, I don't know. I just am kind of following this golden thread of, just kind of opportunities just keep popping up in the future. And I'll just see where it takes me. I know that in the moment, I'm actually working on developing a podcast to
Okay.
go along with this, because I know the world of reading your literature, unfortunately, especially online in the form of blogs, seems to be kind of fading out,
Yeah.
and that the new form tends to be either videos or podcasts. And so I am in the process of developing like a first season of a Bristlecone Firesides podcast and kind of testing out what that looks like.
It's also honestly like a podcast. It seems to be how most people consume this sort of information right now, but also it seems more in keeping with your name. Like, what is a fireside but something you listen to? So
Exactly.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I know I've lucky enough to be connected to a lot of great voices, and especially like Mormon Twitter scene tends to connect me to some people. And so I know I've got a girl that I met off of Twitter, who's a Columbia student, is actually helping me right now develop what a first season of the podcast looks like. And I want to try and keep it to that kind of really chill fireside kind of feeling, so that this is something that, this is just talking around the fire with your friends about God, the universe, and trees.
Yeah. It sounds good. I mean, that there's a long strain in Latter-day Saint thought of environmental stewardship. Um, and to go back to the controversial stuff I said at the beginning, sort of the hijacking of the American Latter-day Saint mind by like 20th century conservatism and some of its um, hobby horses has made it difficult to maintain that sort of environmental care that seems pretty clear to me to exist in scripture, Doctrine and Covenants perhaps in particular, but um, I hope that you have a lot of success in saying things in a way that people will be able to hear.
Yeah, I think that, especially with all what's in light of what's going on right now with, George Floyd murders and the Black Lives Matter protests, that I think what, especially my generation, the millennial generation and down, really needs out of the church and out of our own community is a community that is engaged in the world and is trying to utilize our own scriptures, our own doctrines to try and actually make the world better and not just be as insular and focused on ourselves. And I want to be a part of that because I feel like that's what the future of being a Latter-day Saint means, is to be a member of the world itself.
Yeah, we're not supposed to put baskets on our candles or
Yeah,
whatever
don't
you
don't
said. That's not
be
quite
a
right.
bushel over your fire.
Right, something like that. Over your fireside.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an exciting moment, and I do feel I think there's a great advantage in the fact that millennials and the Zoomers are such large generations,
Yes.
and if we can keep them in the church, I think that the Latter Day Saint role of being that shining light and doing the right thing is a real possibility. I mean, we run the risk of losing some of our advantages. Like other Christian churches, just as a side example, are starting to adopt the idea of a divine feminine, and we had a 200-year head start there, and we haven't done much with it. So why not take the lead?
Yeah. So in some ways, I feel like the iron is getting warm, and that it's, there's a lot of really great voices, especially young voices right now, that have a knack for capturing attention in a way to be able to do good in the world, utilizing our own faith as kind of a heat source to draw from. And
Yeah,
yeah, I desperately want to help people engage with Latter-day Saintism, I guess, or the church in a much more complex and nuanced and mature way, so that we can actually move into the future and begin having those conversations about the divine feminine and our role as stewards over the earth, because those are the conversations that need to be had for the future to exist.
and all these themes are related too. We can't separate them,
Oh,
as
absolutely.
Catherine Sontag's book demonstrates rather beautifully.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, no, that's what I actually love about all these, is that, especially being able to write and be a blog administrator right now, is that I know that environmental issues exist in context with feminist issues that exist, with LGBTQ issues that exist with racist issues, so that all of these things are in context and in communication with each other, and that it seems to be like the tide is rising a little bit, and each boat gets to get a little bit higher.
yeah, charity will conquer in the end. Yes, fingers crossed. It's a little harder to believe that the last few days, but I
Yeah,
do believe it. I do believe that is the march of human history.
yeah,
But
for sure.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Madison.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Anything that you hoped I would ask you that I didn't bring up?
Geez, I don't even know. Uh, yeah, get on the blog and read some of our stuff and click through some of our links. That there is so much great environmental literature within the Latter-day Saint community, written by so many people, from Catherine Knight Sontag to George Hanley to Steve Peck, Brigham Daniels, all these great, there's so many great voices right now.